Hello and welcome to Daily Deer for February 9th. Today's quote, "The wild still lingered in him, and the wolf in him merely slept." Quote by Jack London. I can tell you the wolf in me may have been sleeping for most of winter, but that wolf is fired up and howling, getting ready to go out and look for more of these. So today we're continuing our shed antler topic talk. We talked about it a few days ago, just a few basic tips and tricks, what you can learn from finding sheds and some areas that you may want to start thinking about or looking at, which were areas the deer are spending their time in December and January. And of course, February, the month we're in now, the month where most of these antlers are dropping. And that's where you need to know where your deer herd is. So today, the topic is the art of shed hunting. What makes a good shed hunter? How can you get good at it? So we talked a little bit about things you need to think about, right? You got to be walking in areas where deer have dropped their antlers. Depending where you're at, right? That can very much differ, but it's up to you to kind of know and learn where your herd winters. Large pieces of public land can be tough because a lot of the public lands sometimes are less desirable food sources, so you get fewer deer on them. A lot of deer move off of public and onto private properties that have better food sources, but you can only control the variables you can control. Learn what you can, where you can, and use it to your advantage. As far as the actual act of shed hunting, obviously knowing your timing is something that's important. We're going to talk about that in an upcoming episode of the Daily Deer, which is using trail cams to kind of monitor and keep track of where those deer are when they're shedding, which can really help. But if you're walking early in the shed season, say January, your odds of finding antlers are drastically lower because most of the deer are still going to be wearing their hats. Most of them are still going to be carrying antlers for a little while. Is there a chance to find some? Absolutely. And depending where you're at in the state, like I'm in Wisconsin, just 3 hours north of here, 4 hours north, most of the big bucks that we always chased up there were losing their antlers around the new year. So by mid-January, most of the bucks had dropped their antlers. We're here in southern Wisconsin. Most of the deer were holding for another month or two. And a lot of that has to do with testosterone and how much these deer are competing for food sources and for bedding. Where there's higher concentrations of deer, the bucks are still using a pecking order, whether it's for the dominant bed, whether it's for the food source. They're going out in front of other deer and posturing, and that pecking order is still in existence. There's still some testosterone pumping. It's nowhere near as much as the peak of the rut, obviously, where they're fighting, but these deer are still, putting each other in their place, and there's still that hierarchy in place, which actually keeps their antlers on their heads a little bit longer. But if you live in an area that has a low deer density, those bucks are no longer competing near as much for bedding areas or for food sources typically. And with typically harder winters, they're going to drop their antlers earlier. So knowing when to spend your time is a really important aspect of being a good shed hunter. It doesn't matter how much you walk if you're walking when the antlers aren't on the ground. So knowing when you're going to spend your time, really, really important. Being willing to walk. There's no ifs, ands, ors, or buts about it. If you are going to find sheds, you are going to have to log miles. I just was out yesterday. I drove down to Iowa just for the day, hit some public land. I walked just over 15 miles and I found 2 sheds. So if you break that down, 7.5 miles per shed, it's not bad. Anything under 10 is pretty good. But if you think about that, 10 miles for one shed, that's on public ground, of course. I've had good days, found 7 sheds in a day, but those are few and far between for me, and I've been doing this for a really, really long time. So you got to be prepared to walk. Now, how do you walk? There's a lot of people who do grid searches, right? You got an area that they think there's going to be deer wintering, and they'll do grid searches, which is a great way to find antlers. I personally am not a grid searcher. It's not how my brain works. I'm more of a left brain kind of person. Right brain. whatever side's the more creative side that can't keep track of that stuff, that would be me. I just can't force myself to grid walk. If I find an area that I like, that I think there's a good possibility of antlers, I'm seeing a lot of tracks, seeing a lot of droppings, some big tracks. I'm always going to try my best to walk like a buck would walk. That's almost my goal anytime I go into the woods, is learn to walk where bucks walk. You're going to find their sign easier. You're going to find their sheds easier. And it's not always predictable, right? But that's kind of the mindset I have as I go in the woods. So you can grid search places, really good way to make sure you didn't miss anything, cover areas thoroughly, but obviously it takes a lot more time. But that's a good option. Otherwise, think like a buck. Where would a buck walk? Is it always going to walk down the trails that the does are? No, not always, but it absolutely can. So I'm usually kind of scouring areas where I think bucks would move through. And then it comes down to your eyes. As you're walking, you obviously need to be scanning. One of the biggest mistakes that I make sometimes, depending on terrain, is looking too far out. If you're in an area like an oak flat or on a ridge where you can see far, try not to let your eyes look further than 15 feet. Even 10 feet would be good. But what tends to happen is when you can see further, you tend to look further and you tend to disregard the area within 10 feet of you, which if you're walking like a buck would walk, is probably the best area. And I've damn near stepped on sheds before because I haven't been paying attention, looking out further. God knows I don't want to know how many I've walked over or walked past. But yeah, you keep your gaze close. Like we said last time, always look behind you because the change in angle can be really helpful. And a tip that my mom always uses, we're a pretty short family. She's even shorter than I am. But what she does is when she gets to a good area, she climbs up onto a stump or a deadfall or a little mound, whatever gives her some sort of height elevation. And she just slowly 360 spins and scans. And she has found some of her biggest sheds doing that. Like not on the path she's walking, but as she stands and just looks around, she'll pick them off like that, which is pretty awesome. Really good tip. So you're walking, your speed, right? You got to be patient in the good areas. And then you got to know when you're in a spot in the woods that's not a real solid area. And then you got to just haul, right? Still look, but you got to move. Spend your time where the deer are. And I really do think there is something to your brain, how people's brains work. There are people who are visually inclined. I myself am a visual learner, right? I'm an artist by nature. Photography, drawing, painting. So visually, that's where my brain is. So spotting antlers is a little bit easier for me in my eyes than it is for some people. And that's not something you can necessarily overcome, but you can train it, right? You can train for anything. You want to get better at something, the more you do it, the better you get. So we mentioned last time doing some brain training. Heck, if you've got an antler or even you've got a cutoff from a dead buck you found, bring it with you. Even if it's out in the backyard or the marsh down at the park, bring it with you. Throw that thing out into the branches without looking where it lands and see how quickly you can pick it up. That's good training. Really, it comes down to knowing those specific pockets when signs looking good that you need to slow down, figuring out which way you like to walk. Do you like to grid search spots? Do you think that's going to be most effective? Or do you just want to follow trails around or think like a buck? And then taking your time and training those eyes to pick up that's something that's just a little bit different. And if you do find a shed, okay, don't get too excited right away. Well, I mean, get excited, but keep it internalized. You've got to do a quick little perimeter search because it's very possible that if you've got an antler laying there, the match could be close by. Rule of thumb is if you find an antler, you're going to scour the immediate perimeter within 100 yards really well. That's where I'll kind of start spiraling. And then you want to take note of that area. Because if one buck was wintering there, dropped his antler during that time frame that we want, you found a shed, that could very well mean there could be a bachelor group and there could be more bucks with that one. So take a good look at that area. This past weekend when I was in Iowa, when I found the first shed, I started looking for the match, spread my search out a little bit, and I would say within 200 yards, I found another fresh shed. So there was definitely more than one buck living in that spot. But all those little pieces go together into shed hunting. It all depends on your terrain, where the deer like to winter, what kind of browse they have, what kind of food sources they have. So hopefully that gives you something to think on your day today, and we'll hold you over till your next time you get to go out and try a little shed hunting of your own. So thanks for listening. Have a good day.